So everyone, we'll now move to our next presentation for this big water cycle session. Our next presenter is Lauren Salvato, the Policy and Programs Director for the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association. Lauren will be telling us about the work of the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association related to their Keys to the River report and much more. So Lauren will present for about 20 minutes and then take questions at the end. Please remember to type your questions into the Q&A section and upvote questions that you want answered. And Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering, do you actually mind just advancing my slides? Because I cannot see my presenter notes, and I apologize for that. I should have thought ahead and hooked up 2 screens, but I'm just wondering if you could just go ahead and do that for me, and then I wouldn't have to.
Do we have a copy of them on our end?
You do. I don't know if you can just, so I apologize for this, folks. I just want to make sure I don't miss any of this great important information that I'm going to share with you about the Upper Mississippi River Basin.
Okay, yeah, let me just, Aaron, are you able to pull those up? Okay, give us a second. We're not sure where they are. Sorry.
Oh, okay. This was my fault because here I was trying to stay electronic and not print something, but then here we are now in a bind. But appreciate Aaron and Natalie's help on that. And then also just we're going to have a poll in the event Mobi just to kick off this presentation. So just so you're aware to look out for it. I'd love to get your response.
Yeah, those poll responses are coming in now. So as soon as we
great.
find the slides, sorry about that.
I'm working on it. Sorry about that. I didn't have them ready.
Thanks, Aaron.
And Steve, since you're on, there's some, I'm going to talk about the UMRBA program again, and we do have a really dynamic partnership in the Upper Mississippi River Basin. So if you didn't have a question then, you'll hear the information again, and hopefully that's a great way to hear the information and then generate some questions. So, all right, I will go ahead and kick this off if that works for you, Natalie and Aaron.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. So thank you for the opportunity to present and discuss the Upper Mississippi River Basin. I did present last year at the conference, and it was wonderful. I do have some similar themes on the river to update you on, and I hope to set that stage regionally, and then our next presenter, Sean Giblin, is going to maybe focus in on that local level and those challenges that we have. Next slide, please. I'll take you through our challenges on the Upper Mississippi River Basin at a regional level, but the ways that we are building resilience in the system. And I hope to do that by let's kicking off with a poll question, talking about UMRBA and who we are and what we do on the river. And then some turbulent topics, including flood sediment drought, nutrient runoff, and the Water Quality Improvement Act. And we'll end with some opportunities for collaboration and questions. Okay, next slide. And this is the poll question that we have in the event Mobi for you all. So there are 2 major watersheds in Wisconsin, the Mississippi River Basin and the Great Lakes Basin. A watershed is an area of land that drains all the streams and rainfall to a common outlet, such as an outflow of a reservoir, mouth of a bay, or any point along a stream and channel. So the question is, what percent of Wisconsin's area drains to the Mississippi River? And I'll just go ahead and pause there while folks finish up answering the poll question, and then we can share the results.
It looks like we've got responses coming in, and the response with the most votes was C, 76%.
Wow. Okay, so actually so what I was thinking was that the vote was gonna be for less. The answer is actually A, 69%. So you all are pretty close. That's wonderful that you know that the Mississippi actually, or Wisconsin's area drains to more than half of the Mississippi basin. So that's great to know. Okay, next slide, please. Thanks for your participation in that. Okay, so the Upper Mississippi River Basin, that watershed area is in the left figure in dark gray outlined there. And it spans 5 states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. And the upper Mississippi River flows approximately 1,300 miles from the headwaters of Lake Itasca in northern Minnesota to the confluence of the Ohio River at the southern tip of Illinois. The navigable portions that you see are in the colors there, green, orange, red, and purple. And that's from the Twin Cities metro area, again, to the Ohio River confluence. So we have 37 locks and dams between the upper Mississippi River and the Illinois Riverway, and they were built to create a stairway for which barge traffic and other river uses can move. The river is dredged to maintain a 9-foot navigation channel. And barge is an incredibly efficient way to move goods and materials, and a capacity of a barge is 15 times that of a rail car and 60 times that of a truck. Next slide, please. Oh, there's that photo. Great. So the river is managed for multiple uses. This was further supported by a congressional declaration in 1986 that the Upper Mississippi River Basin is a nationally significant ecosystem and nationally significant commercial navigation system. Economic sectors in the Upper Miss and Illinois waterway corridors generate more than $548 billion annually, supporting over 1.86 million jobs. From tourism and recreation, supports over 686,000 jobs and 54.6 billion generated. And as Steve previously pointed out, ecosystem is prized for its biodiversity, includes 127 species of fish, 30 species of freshwater mussels, and 300 species of birds. Next slide, please. And this is a really important program on the river, and it really deserves a second reiteration or a first if you weren't in Steve's previous presentation there. But the Upper Mississippi River Restoration Program is a comprehensive program for ecosystem scientific research and monitoring. It was enacted in the 1986 Water Resources Development Act to better understand the ecology of the river, its resource issues, monitor changes, and propose new ways to better manage resources. It's a multiple partnership effort, and you can see all those logos at the bottom of the slide, including Wisconsin DNR. It includes the 5 states of the Upper Miss Basin and federal agencies. And the 2 elements of the program are long-term resource monitoring and habitat restoration and enhancement projects. Next slide, please. LTRM conducts monitoring of the river. USGS manages this portion, and the 5 states implement the monitoring. In that previous figure you saw, those red were our long-term monitoring sites, and this is the same area where field stations are housed. So for example, Minnesota DNR has a field station in Lake City, Minnesota in Pool 4. LTRM has randomized sampling as well that covers a great longitude and latitude of the river. HREPs are restoration projects implemented to fight ecosystem stressors and degrading influences. Examples of restoration projects are wing dikes, which are structures to help redirect the river's energy and provide a variety of effects. And another example is building islands where they historically existed. Since the program's inception in 1986, 106,000 acres have been improved through 56 projects. Next slide, please. Now on to UMRBA. We were formed in 1981 by the governors of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri to facilitate dialogue and cooperative action regarding water and related land resource issues. We were previously a federal state compact in 1977, but were abolished during the Reagan administration. UMRBA opened its doors the next day as a 501c3. So that being said, we do not have land management or regulatory functions. Our board members span from departments of ag, DNRs, environmental regulatory agencies, and DOTs to represent the wide range of river-related expertise. We identify and voice their collective interests, augment our state's capacity on river-related issues, and foster relationships with federal agencies and stakeholders. Next slide, please. Our issue areas span everything from ecosystem health to commercial navigation. I primarily focus in on our clean water issue area, convening the Water Quality Executive Committee, our policymaking body, and the Water Quality Task Force, our technical body. And Sean, our next presenter, is actually a member of the Water Quality Task Force. Our focus areas are organized into tiers. Tier 1 includes nutrient reduction strategies and Clean Water Act assessments. Tier 2 includes HABs, emerging contaminants such as PFAS, and chloride. Next slide, please. So I'd like to switch gears and discuss the challenges in the basin and why building resilience is critical. Next slide. Both urban and agricultural non-point source pollution have contributed to the high levels of nutrient suspended sediments. In the figure, you can see the red zones represent urban areas and the yellows and others represent agricultural production. Next slide. There's a higher volume of water in the basin as well. In the graph, mean daily discharge by decade is presented at Lock and Dam 3. On the y-axis is cubic feet per second, and months are represented on the x-axis. 1960 in light blue is perhaps the best example of what our ecosystem adapted to. Pulses of spring water, not quite as high, lower water levels in the summer, and slight increases in the fall and winter timeframe. As we move forward in time by decade, we can see reduced discharge around the springtime, but water levels are sustained, if not higher, during the summer months, and they increase into late fall and winter. Next slide. As we know, 2019 was a catastrophic year for flooding. Communities were upended, farmers were unable to harvest and some even lay seed, and the navigation channel was closed for 130 days. 2 years later, our communities are still recovering from these damages. Next slide. So continuing with examples of why we need to build resilience, we default that the upper Midwest is very wet, but the truth is that we're still prone to drought. Pictured is the University of Nebraska's drought monitor indicating abnormally dry but short-term impacts in Minnesota and Wisconsin. In western Iowa, northern Minnesota, and central and eastern Illinois, the SL denotes a combination of short and long-term drought effects. Another example is in 2018, northern Missouri experienced significant drought during the fall that had some towns days away from running out of its public water supply. Next slide. I'm going to transition next to solutions that build resilience in our basin. And on the next slide, I'll talk about building that resilience. So there is resounding agreement that the status quo is not acceptable and that change in management and land use is needed. The overall objective of this new work of UMRBA is to answer how to increase the resilience of the upper Mississippi River to major flood events, prolonged drought, and excessive sediment for the purposes of maintaining a safe and reliable navigation channel. This will include evaluating where and how should existing land uses be protected and sustained into the foreseeable future. Where should land use be different? What does resilient and sustainable flood, drought, and sediment look like? Solutions will primarily focus on actions in the river floodplain, but will also illuminate where and how actions in the watershed would be most effective for improving the river's resilience. In the past, our states have had conflict with the Army Corps of Engineers over reoccurring requests to issue emergency dredging permits. Flooding and drought have occurred and continue to pose threats, as I previously mentioned. Next slide. Through a series of citizen sessions and other opportunities for input, UMRBA and the 5 states compiled high leverage action items with regional consent. These actions are further refined and included in our Keys to the River 2020 report. Some of these actions can be acted upon now, and while others require a funding source. And we are planning to complete this report in summer 2021. On the next slide, I talk about some example actions. For flooding, that's developing and updating an Army Corps of Engineer hydrological model, which moves it from one-dimensional to two-dimensional to help evaluate flooding under the same conditions and assumptions. In the process of developing the report, we were able to secure funding for the remainder of the upper Mississippi River, which I understand is nearly complete, and funding has also been secured for the Illinois waterway and will be completed in the near future. For drought, inventorying critical infrastructure on the floodplain that would be negatively impacted by drought, and that includes water intake for a public water supplier. For sediment and channel management, developing marketing opportunities to use dredge material in beneficial ways. That involves engaging the public and private sectors to overcome the capacity of dredge material placement sites. On the next slide, an example of a great partner and resource for you all is the recently revamped drought.gov. This serves as a resource for the nation as well as the Midwest with regard to tools and educational material and more. This is just to show that we are not reinventing the wheel with this effort and have used this report to acknowledge existing resources and also work with those groups on what the needs are for our upper Mississippi River Basin. Next slide. We need more resources to fight the degrading influences of water and sediment in the basin. UMRBA is working to authorize the Water Quality Improvement Act, a federal state collaborative to improve and sustain clean water in the upper Mississippi River Basin and propel the investment of reduction of nutrients and sediment runoff as well as other pollutants. Next slide. The components of the Act include a monitoring network, which is scaling up real-time sensors in the watershed and strategically placing them where data gaps exist. Then there's modeling and research, communication strategy, sediment and nutrient runoff reduction, which I'll describe on the next slide, and a Mississippi River National Program Office. The big piece of this act is this program office. This would formally create a federal-state partnership and better leverage resources and direct them to urban and agricultural conservation practices. This office would be jointly administered by US EPA and NRCS. NRCS is known for their leadership, development of relationships with farmers, and overall promotion of soil health and agricultural conservation practices. US EPA has been a leader of the Hypoxia Task Force and administers grants through other program offices and programs. This would allow the upper Mississippi River Basin to have sort of a comparable Great Lakes Basin initiative and program office, but one that fits the challenges and needs of our basin and a major river floodplain. Excuse me. Next slide. So we are proposing to bring additional federal funding to our 5 states to implement conservation practices in agricultural and urban landscapes to address non-point source pollution. Next slide. Each state's nutrient reduction strategy would guide where BMPs are implemented. Pictured on the right is Wisconsin's latest nutrient reduction strategy. One of the Hypoxia Task Force's action items was for each state to develop strategies to address nitrogen and phosphorus contributions to the Gulf of Mexico. These strategies are developed with stakeholder input, so we expect that additional funding for voluntary conservation practices will be received well and would help states meet their nutrient reduction goals. The Hypoxia Task Force was founded in 1997 to address the eutrophication of the Gulf of Mexico. The coordinating committee of the Hypoxia Task Force comprises of states of the Mississippi River Basin, federal agencies, regional groups like UMRBA, and tribal members. The Hypoxia Task Force states have agreed to reduce their nitrogen and phosphorus loading by 45% by 2035 to mitigate the hypoxic zone of the Gulf of Mexico. On the next slide, I'd like to offer ways to engage and collaborate with the upper Mississippi River Basin. We'd appreciate your support of the Water Quality Improvement Act. You can do so by contacting your congressperson, getting involved in your local watershed. Anything you can do to mitigate sediments and nutrient on the landscape will benefit the main stem of the upper Mississippi River. And 3, participating in UMRBA's or UMRR's quarterly meetings. Feel free to contact me if you are interested, as well as if you have any other questions or comments that haven't been addressed today. On the next slide is my final one and my contact information. So I appreciate your attention today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lauren. So it seems like we do have a few minutes for questions, and I see 2 that have come in. The first is, Army Corps work restricted to working in only interstate waters?
Yeah, okay, I'm unmuted. Yeah, so their work would be where there's federal authority. And so in the case of where you have a large river, there is state authority there for certain things and federal authorities. And I don't really have time or, a lot of expertise on that to get into it further, but it would just be where navigable waterways and that is where, so they come into the picture.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then a second question is, regarding the documentation of existing critical infrastructure, what is the best way for someone or business to determine if their infrastructure has been logged with UMRBA?
Great question, and an effort, unfortunately, that we haven't started yet. I think there are so many different ways to define critical infrastructure, and so I think we're kind of working through that before we can, there's going to be this public water supply arena. There's going to be things that are in local communities and businesses. So I appreciate the question. I don't have an answer for you yet, but hopefully in the years following, if UMRBA is back presenting, we can follow up with you on that. But also, if you want to give me your contact information and reach out, then I can keep you in mind for as we're moving forward on that.
Great, thank you.